Hi, everybody. This is Paul Hitchcock with the asset protection, estate planning, and business planning firm BarthCalderon. This is our channel, Wealth Protector TV, where we bring you great education and really excited for two guests today. I have Phil Shekerlian, who's a senior partner at BarthCalderon. I have Christopher Anderson, who is the founder of New Leaf Legacy, a asset protection firm, and New Leaf Family, a divorce law firm, family law firm. Welcome, Christopher and Phil.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah,
Hey, Paul, good morning.
and I want to jump into this because this is specifically around both of your areas of expertise, divorce and estate planning. And Christopher, I want to start with you. Uh, we were just actually talking about it offline. Some of the unknowns going into a divorce and what some misconceptions? Like, what are your clients and what do you see that they should be focused on? Set the table there.
Yeah, well, I mean, so obviously when people are going into divorce, they're usually focused on the divorce, right?
Yeah,
So and one of the things that I've really tried to do in founding this family of law firms, there's a method to our madness, right? We are concerned about empowering people to visualize and then bring their future into being, right? That's what we're all about. And divorce, people think of divorce as an end, but it's also a beginning, and it's a beginning of that future. And so tying asset protection and divorce together is very, very important because you're rebuilding a new future. And so what we counsel and what I advise very strongly is to not get focused on the past, who hurt who and did what to
all
whom.
right, right.
And most people think when they hear that, they think about, yeah, we should try not to blame. But actually, what I'm really talking about with a lot of our clients is also don't live in guilt, right? It's what's done is done, and it's time to start and shift our attention to the future.
You mean guilt, like they're guilty that they got divorced and they feel horrible about
Or that's
themselves
their
or something?
fault.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people are like, oh, don't live in the blame. That everybody talks about that, but they don't realize that sometimes you're talking to someone who feels like whether or not it's true, that they're the ones to blame. This is
Yeah,
their
no, it's a
fault.
good
If they
call.
hadn't done X or neglected Y, this wouldn't have happened.
Hmm.
And instead to then, and also certainly don't get caught up in the present, in the conflict, in the fight, in the drama. But that's where most people's heads are. And where they aren't is protecting their future and
Right.
understanding that there's certain plans that they had. Of course, there were the plans about living together forever. There's that plan.
Hmm.
But there's also some plans that they put in place as to assets, as to how they're going to fund their retirement, as
Yep.
to how they're going to take care of their um, dependents, that their focus is often not there. And a lot of mistakes can happen there. And that's, Phil is going to be like, Phil's the expert on this stuff. But it's like, it's great stuff to talk about like, what's going to be happening? What should you be thinking about? What's changed? Are you thinking about that during the divorce process and protecting yourself and your kids and your family and your heirs going forward?
It's a great way to put it. I've heard, watching your videos over the months we've got to know each other, that message has become very clear. It's almost like a get the emotion out of it because if you're emotional coming in and it's confrontational, not really the path you want to pursue. So the way you describe it, I think is fantastic. Uh, as well as we get into this, and Phil, I want you to start chiming in here too, because what we're trying to figure out is what, when it comes to estate planning, and I know, Christopher, you're seeing a lot of this, but when people start getting involved in a divorce, they often don't understand what they can and cannot do when it comes to their planning, what they should be doing. And so, Phil, coming into this, How is estate planning different, just generally during a divorce, than just doing an estate plan out of a divorce?
Yeah, so when you're not in a divorce, your estate plan is your dream. You can make it what you want it to be. But when you're in a divorce, there may be some rules imposed by the court. And then, the general status quo is that during a divorce, there's some kind of freeze in place where assets may not be able to be moved at all. And in those situations, you have to do an estate plan with well, I'm planning for what I have when I come out of here. And you can still put your estate plan in place, but you can't move the assets into the trust yet. But you could make a general assignment or some kind of document that says, hey, if something were to happen to me during this divorce, whatever I come out with, I do intend to have in my estate plan, and you can make that happen. I think Chris can help a little bit more. There are some cases where there may not be a freeze, and they may be able to do stuff with assets, though.
Yeah, because Christopher, can you mention that? Because we got into that a little bit. I think that'd be a
Yeah.
good detail to share.
Yeah, sure. So, and I think also it's really, really important because where Phil was going, I just want to make sure we kind of put some structure in the conversation for our listeners. Is that from because Phil said, well, you're in a divorce, right? I often talk to our clients and people who are doing this that divorce, in fact, is a process, right? It's not a moment. It is a process. But from the law's perspective, you're married
Hmm.
until you're divorced, right? And that there's a really hard line there. And to Phil's point, so during the process, you're still married. And so you whatever you do should be have that in contemplation. And then as soon as you're divorced, you're not married. And there are certain things that happen automatically that you need to be aware of, and certain things that you might think happen automatically that don't. And so, as you work with your asset protection folks, you need to make sure that you, I think the best way to think about it is like the old tradition of jumping the broom, right? As you jump from being married to being not married or no longer married, divorced, you make sure you do all the things because, like Phil said, you can
Yep.
set it all up, but don't forget to do it because it
Yep.
doesn't happen automatically.
And I
Now,
Yeah.
think it's an important distinction, like you said, that it's a whole process. You almost have three different steps. You have before any paperwork is filed while
yep,
you're talking about splitting. You have after paperwork is filed, and then after the divorce is final. And there's different things you can do in each of those stages depending on whether you're in a community property state, separate property state, whether assets are community property or separate property, and that all makes a difference as well.
absolutely. And so back to Paul's question, because I kind of avoided it a little bit, but I just wanted to make sure we got that structure. I love the structure you proposed, right? It's three boxes. Where you
Yep.
got, we're married and we might be talking about splitting, but we're not, we haven't done anything. That's phase one. Phase two, like we filed something that started, and then phase
Game
three,
on.
it's over.
Yeah.
And what you were asking about, Paul, was okay, during that second phase, papers have been filed. Um, what happens? What can you do? What can't you do? And the answer to that is it's state specific. I'm licensed in Colorado, in New York, and in Georgia,
Hmm.
not in California. But and I'm also aware of many other states. Most states have some sort of preliminary or automatic injunction that drops into place that says status quo. So, and what that means, because it's, people think about, oh, you can't move assets. That might be true. If you've got money in this bank account, it needs to stay there. If you've got debts in these credit accounts, it needs to stay there. But it also means things like if you were paying for the country club, you got to keep doing it. If you were paying for the car insurance, you got to keep doing it. If you were paying for your spouse to go to the spa once a week, you got to keep doing it.
Oh yeah.
And so status quo goes broader than moving assets or not moving assets. And then, but people also feel like, oh my God, that's really going to be horrible. I'm handcuffed. I can't do things that are smart, right? Sometimes A divorce could take a year or longer. Sometimes you want to move money from some asset class that's performing or that's stopped performing, that's not performing, or that's in
Right.
danger, over to some other safer asset class. And the answer is you can do that, but once the divorce starts, it has to be either by agreement or you have to go to the court and say, "Hey, court, I don't want bad things to happen to the marital estate while we're going through this. So I'd like to move this money from here to there." And then the court can decide whether to, the other side, of course, your spouse gets to say why that's a terrible idea or not. And then the court gets to decide whether you can do that. But it's not meant to, that injunction is not meant to be um, bricks around your ankles or anything. Like, it's just meant to keep everybody aware of the fact that you don't have the same level of freedom that you did before.
Yeah, because that bring up in my mind, I'm thinking about couples that own a business. Maybe
Hmm.
they're involved in business or rental income property. Maybe they got to evict a tenant. I mean, things are going on, right? Especially if the divorce is going on for years, which can happen.
Yeah.
So you're saying you don't need court approval for all of those things. A tenant, we need to get the tenant out. You got to go to the court to make that happen, or if you're agreeing, you're good.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, if you agree, you're good, right?
Okay.
And
But
again, I
get it
don't
in
want
writing.
what's that?
But get it in writing.
Yeah.
You were exactly where I was going, but yeah, get it. Do be a little bit more formal, right? If you've got an attorney, have the attorneys write it. If you write it down, get it done. There's also this concept of regular course of business, right? It's not every little thing. So, like, if you're in um, a landlord tenant situation where you own some properties, if it's in the normal and regular course of business that sometimes you evict people, you collect rent, whatever, like, you I would normally advise the clients in the states of where I am licensed that you don't have to get permission for each and every one of those transactions that are in the normal course of business. But if you want to sell a building or buy a building or renovate a building, that might require some level of agreement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great clarity. Oh,
Let me ask
yeah.
another question. So, Christopher, I get this sometimes. Clients are in this long divorce process and they're ready for it to be done, and they just want to start their life moving forward again. How does it work for clients that want to buy new assets? We ask this all the time. Hey, can I buy a new asset in my name and keep it out of the divorce?
No,
No.
not without. It's the same thing. Not without. Well, first of all, where's the money coming from? Right?
Yeah. Yep.
So that goes into that category of that doesn't sound like status quo. That sounds like an agreement. And so because at least in the states where I practice, like that those transactions would be happening inside the marital estate and then subject to division. And so if you're going to make any of those kinds of transactions, you want to get clarity about that in writing or through the court, as to what the intention is and that the other side either agrees or that has been ordered to agree to that new characterization.
Yeah.
Okay, Phil, I got to ask you this specific question because we're on phase two now, going
Mhm.
through divorce, and what couples can and should do. And if you could talk about a bit about power of attorneys, healthcare directives, beneficiary designations, because a big thing that comes up a lot is, God forbid somebody gets, sick or really ill during the divorce, and now they've got to rely on their soon-to-be ex-spouse. So talk
Yeah.
about those documents and what you should be doing.
Yeah, so we see this a lot of times, and we actually had one situation where client was going through a divorce and ended up in they ended up incapacitated. They weren't able to make their own decisions. And if you haven't changed your documents after you file that paperwork, or even before you file that paperwork, your spouse is more than likely the one that's on your healthcare directive, power of
Yeah.
attorney, things like that. And in this case, the spouse had the option of whether or not to pull the plug on somebody they're divorcing. And you
Right.
really don't want to be that person in that situation. So it's important to, once you're starting to think about divorce, maybe potentially changing your documents. When you do an estate plan, the only document that's a joint document is your trust. You have your own individual will, you have your own individual power of attorney, own individual health care directive, and even
Ah,
nomination of guardians is really important too, which is who takes care
Yeah.
of your kids if something happens to you. And so you can make those changes whether you're married in the middle of a divorce or after a divorce. and say who your agents are going to be. It doesn't have to be your spouse.
So you don't have to get your spouse to sign off on something like that. If you
You
guys are in a
don't
bit of
know.
fight, you can just go do it.
You can do that on your own
Oh,
without court approval, without spouse approval, everything.
okay. So I got to say then, and Christopher, you can answer this too, isn't it just automatic when somebody files for a divorce, you got to change those things? Doesn't that become part of the process? Or am I
It
looking at
should
that?
be, but
Yeah,
most people don't. Again, like this is that's
they
why
don't do it.
it's so great that we're doing this show, right? Because most people don't think about it, don't realize that those are really important things. I mean, yeah, imagine that. But like, listen, the truth is that a lot of divorces that I help people go through, they're not bitter, they're not awful, and a lot of them probably, when given the option about changing the health directive and who's in charge of their healthcare, would probably still choose their spouse.
Yeah,
Sometimes we do see that.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
but not
yeah,
always.
yeah,
and and so to me, it's not what Phil's talking about. Like it's and what you were asking about. It shouldn't be automatic that they're changed. It should be automatic that we think about them and
yeah,
we
yeah.
ask the question.
Hmm.
Do we chose Aunt Harriet and Uncle Milton as the replacement guardians should something happen to both of us. Are we still both okay with that? Is that what we want? And the answer is either yes or no, and or maybe. And that's it's just important to have those conversations. And you know what? What's really cool, what I find anyway, is sometimes having those conversations helps to bring civility back into the process because it's focusing on it's again turning our attention to the future. It's saying, you know what? That question shows you actually still do care about me as a human being. We may no longer want to be spouses, but you care about me as a human being. And I care about you as a human being, and we each care about our futures. And that's a great place to start to shift the perspective. So these are, I think, can very often be positive conversations. But to Phil's point, if I want someone else to have the healthcare decisions for me, that's my prerogative before the divorce starts, during the divorce, and after the divorce. That doesn't
Yeah.
change. That's my sole prerogative.
Okay. And Phil, how quickly do those documents get changed? Is that something where they make decisions and it's weeks, and those important documents can be changed in divorce?
Yeah, I mean, typically our process is a couple of weeks to get those documents changed if you come to us, but we can do it, overnight if necessary.
Okay.
Along with who your agents should be, you need to change your beneficiary designations. Do you want your life insurance going to your ex-spouse if he or she is on there? And do you want your bank accounts and things like that? Who's the beneficiary? Not only do you have to contemplate what if you were to die during the divorce, but what if both of you and your spouse die during the divorce?
Yeah.
What happens
Yeah.
then? Make sure your kids and heirs are planned for as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I will caution that unlike the healthcare thing, life insurance beneficiary might be one of those things that you need to get agreement or permission.
Yeah.
Because that's an economic decision that affects your spouse. And I would counsel my clients that that's something we need to get an agreement on, that would
Yeah, that's
not
true.
be, that could run afoul of the injunction.
Same with a 401k, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 The
Yeah.
401k needs a special process anyways. You got to go through uh,
Quadro.
Quadro, yeah, to make changes to that, and that's not a quick process either.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, that one's always seems to be involved. And Christopher, I wanted to follow just the point there. The attorneys at your firm, the family law firm, as far as addressing those issues about, changing beneficiaries, estate plan, is that part of your intake process, or when is that brought up with them?
So that's usually discussed during the initial strategy conversation. So it's not definitely not in the intake process, but in the initial strategy conversation, we do an assessment of what things might need some adjustment and have that conversation. And we often will refer, even though we also have an asset protection business, a lot of times our clients already have that person, right?
Hmm.
So, and that's fine. Like it doesn't, but we do make sure that they're talking to their asset protection people, about all those issues and getting those documents done because that's something that should be done by someone with expertise in that area.
Yeah, but what we've seen too with divorces is there's been an asset protection estate planning attorney helping the couple, but
Yeah.
now they're separate. They don't
Yeah.
want to use the same person anymore.
Yeah.
We see
Yeah.
that a lot.
Yeah. And sometimes, yeah, it's time to find someone else.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I want to get into this phase three, post-divorce, right? With what happens, and I thought it was fascinating because I read this a while back. Where you remember that Marilyn Monroe saying "Happy Birthday" to John Kennedy,
How
and
old do you think I am?
you read about it. You read about it
I've read
somewhere.
about it.
Yeah, you read it. But she had this dress on when it was an iconic moment in American history, whatever. But the dress she was wearing, she was married on it 4 or 5 times. She left one of the guys she was married to for a few months, then went on with her life. And when she died, that guy had the dress
Hmm.
and it became a huge battle fight because it was worth millions and millions of dollars because she didn't do her estate plan. She didn't want
Right.
him to have the dress, and this
Yeah.
guy didn't have. So, anyways, I think it highlights a point of proper planning after a divorce. And so, Phil, what happens with somebody? And there's a few issues, right? Because they got to do
Yeah.
everything, but if they get married and there's stepkids, all that stuff.
Yeah. I think the first thing you should do is, plan on updating your estate plan. Make sure that you're ready for, if you pass away, and also work on your retirement plan as well. You now your retirement plan before while you were married was probably completely different than what it's going to be now. And so
Right.
you need to work with your financial professional and your attorneys to work on that. Also get your estate plan in place, healthcare director, power of attorney, will, trust, all that good stuff. But then also, if you're going through a divorce for a long time, I commonly see this. People are almost ready to get remarried again by the time the
Yeah.
divorce is over.
Yeah.
And so you need to make sure that you have a plan so that you don't have to worry about this the next time if you have to get divorced. And so you want to make sure that your assets are protected, whether it's a prenuptial agreement or irrevocable trusts to keep your assets separate property. You need to have that in place before you get too heavily involved in a new relationship.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
especially Phil. I mean, like I know you face this all the time, but like when it's your first marriage and you do your estate planning, it's you, your spouse, and your kids.
Mhm.
I don't want to call it simple because there are complexities around that. But now there's been a divorce, and like you said, like it is shocking how like people do just jump right back into marriages a lot of the time. And but now you've got you, your spouse, your kids, their kids,
Mhm.
possibly your together kids, the kids that you end up having together. Um, it gets a lot more complicated, and it can be difficult conversations about, okay, because the second marriage, very often you don't come in at the same economic level. One might come in with more assets and more capabilities than the other. And, what do you want to go to your spouse's kids of what you brought into the marriage? What do you want to go to your own kids? How do you want it? Like, do you want it to be even Steven, or do you want it to be, more related to whose kids are whose? All so many more questions,
And,
Yeah.
right?
and these are conversations that you really should have with your new spouse or potential spouse before you go to your attorney's office. Unfortunately, I've
Yeah,
caused divorces in my office where,
absolutely.
where it's a
Happens all
blended
the time.
family like that, and one spouse has all the money, the other spouse doesn't have any assets or really make any money, and the new spouse thinks that when the spouse dies that they're going to get all the assets, but the spouse that has all the assets says no, my kids are getting all the assets, and then that ends up in a huge fight.
Yeah.
And so it's things that you got to navigate.
Yeah. Those are, I mean, again, back to the grown up conversations. And these are grown up
Yeah.
conversations. And it is important to have it. I often advise people like before you go see your estate planning, go talk to a counselor. Go walk through these issues
Good
because
idea.
what's happening in your office is you're talking about money and fear is there and you're facing a situation that, with all due respect, neither you nor I is qualified to help these people through, which is to walk through that fear, the fear of abandonment, fear of what their parents did to them 40 years ago. And all of this stuff just comes, boom, it's all there because when you're talking about money and you're talking about future, it all comes out. And
We actually have a counselor like that can talk to people about just these exact situations.
yeah, that's
Yep.
amazing. In your office, you do?
But no, it's part of our network.
Okay,
We offer
perfect.
to clients.
I think
Yeah.
it's great to have, yeah, somebody like that on speed dial, basically.
Yeah,
Like you,
yeah.
you guys need to talk to them first, and that could be helpful. People often think of prenups or postnups, what they are generally called in Colorado. They're called marital agreements and premarital agreements, but as kind of icky. And I think of them as like like one of the first real mature conversations, a prenup in particular, like a premarital agreement. Like that is a wonderfully loving, mature conversation to have because
Yep.
again, what you're really saying in that conversation is, I am concerned about your future and I'm concerned about mine, and I don't want to leave these things unsaid. And what you disclose and what you talk about there, it can be difficult because we're taught not to talk about those things, but they're so important, and really the sign of a mature relationship.
Yeah, because the prenups, even the postnups, have a negative connotation to them. Like, oh,
Yeah,
I just, we're probably going to get divorced. I want to keep my stuff signed here, sort of a thing. Yeah, but which is interesting because this gets into Phil and Christopher. You comment on this too, but the trust design, Phil, you do. So if new marriage, right? The great divorce is a big thing. So people are getting married a
oh yeah,
second time, bringing assets into the second marriage because of the great divorce thing, kids and all that. So, um, and where maybe there's a likelihood the guy's passing away first, whatever the case is, that the new spouse talks to you about trust design where the spouse can be taken care of for the rest of his or her life while still taking care of the kids. Phil, can you mention how trust design comes into play there?
Yeah, there's several ways to set up your trust, and you can, let's say I were to die first, I could set it up so that my spouse could get access to the assets. I could get it so that my spouse gets the assets, or I could get where the spouse just gets access until she dies, and then my kids get the assets after that. So, you can really play around with the different designs of it and the level of control as well. Does the surviving spouse in a blended marriage, do they get to have any control over the assets, or maybe somebody else gets to control it? Maybe it's your sibling, or even a professional trustee in that case, to make sure that there is no fighting between the spouse and the kids.
Yeah, and Christopher, we get, I think on average, 7 calls a week from families fighting over assets,
sure.
right? The kids and everything. And we have, we have litigators, that estate litigators and stuff, and Phil's doing the probate and all. But what do you see with this? Because we're seeing it all the time.
Yeah, well, so first of all, I mean, I think what Phil said is exactly right. So like be making people aware, first of all, of the choices that they have, and then helping them to articulate those choices. And it's something that's like probably, I don't know what Phil's experience with it is, but it's like usually not one meeting. Like it's a meeting, go forth and think about this. Again, maybe talk to a counselor, come back, and we'll design it. And then is that what you wanted? Is that the result? And like trying to go through all the permutations of what would happen. From my perspective, like it should also be paired with a marital agreement or pre or post note, because we spend all this time going, okay, if I were to go first, then I want you to have everything that you need while you're alive, but then we'll allocate how it goes to the kids. But what happens if I'm incapacitated?
Yep.
What happens if the marriage doesn't work out? Are you living on borrowed time? Like, are if the marriage doesn't work out, are you back out on the street? Like it should be from a plan that goes actually from this moment forward, and not just for what happens if something happens to me first or something happens to you first. What happens tomorrow? is also a great question. And if we and what I find is if we can agree to all those things, then that is a subject of stress that's gone, just
Right.
gone from the marriage, and we can actually focus on being and living and loving and not stressing. And if we're not going to agree, if there's some point of disagreement about that, now is probably a good time to know,
Hmm.
rather
Hmm.
than when something happens that's unexpected. So I totally agree about like having that conversation about what happens uh, upon death, but like we are supposed to have it, what happens upon disability, what happens upon dissolution of marriage.
Yeah, and the
And I want
separate.
to go back. I want to go back to that adult conversation thing. If possible, you may need to have an adult conversation like that with your ex-spouse. We had a
Sure.
situation where husband and wife had a son and a daughter, and for whatever reason, wife was going to leave the majority of her assets to the daughter and not a whole lot to the son. And the husband, they're divorced now, but the male, he wanted to make sure that the kids got equal amounts. So he wanted to make sure his estate plan equaled it out between the son and the daughter. And so, you may need to have that conversation with your ex-spouse to make sure that the kids are taken care of properly as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, yeah, it just gets complicated.
Yeah.
And that's where having, I imagine you could probably design a trust situation where they could each pour assets into that trust and the trust would have those desires laid out because one
Absolutely.
of the unless because you could have that conversation in your situation he could have that conversation with his ex-wife, but the minute he walks out the door he doesn't know what she's going to do,
Yeah.
right? So
Yep.
and she doesn't know what he's going to do, so it's sometimes like there are vehicles that can be designed where it's clear to everybody and they can't be changed without everybody agreeing. And with their significant assets, those sometimes make a lot of sense. And people like Phil, and people that do asset protection can make sure that that's all those desires are laid out and fulfilled.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's interesting on the marital separate property agreement or the post-nup, we want to call it, but our founder, Harry Barth, has always made an interesting comment. He says this in all of his workshops when he's talking about, he says, I've had a separate property agreement with my wife for 45 years. He's been married for 50 years, loves his
Yeah.
wife, because he says, we live in a community property state here in
Right.
California. And people typically think, oh, community property, 50-50 in a divorce. Yes, but it's also a liability to one spouse is a liability to the other spouse. So the entire
People forget about that part.
people forget about it. Harry says, I don't want to be sitting in my conference room at my law firm and my wife gets in a car accident, God forbid, and now all of a sudden they're trying to take away my law firm because
Hmm.
I'm sitting here. So those separate property agreements are great. And he makes a joke about approaching your spouse the right way. I love you, but we got to have this in place, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, the people. Yeah, it's very, very true because the debit side, the debt side of it, is often overlooked, but
Totally.
it's just as important.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, we're hitting the wall here, Tommy. I got to say, this is fantastic. I wanted to get just a quick hit in from both of you to get people thinking, about this stuff. Very important. I want to tell everybody that's listening here, get connected with Christopher and Phil. Their information on how to connect with them, their social sites are going to be all around this video, wherever you're watching
Wonderful.
it. Yeah, we're going to simulcast this everywhere: YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, X. So maybe it's up here, down here. Very good people. And Christopher's content is insane. I've watched a lot of it. Very educational along with Phil. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Paul.
Thanks,
It's been
Chris.
a great conversation. Phil, really pleasure speaking with you.